Hello, and welcome to the Uncharted Way podcast, mapping your destiny in unique, different ways than society really allows us to experience transformation and journeys. This podcast is all about hearing stories of courageous people willing to step beyond the norm of society and culture and find a way for them to thrive in life that feels fucking good. So our first guest we have today is a beautiful friend of mine, Lisa Holt, who is a relationship coach, and she has been through her own transformation that has inspired me to have her on this podcast. So welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about, let's just kind of get into your story. I know that you have had autoimmune things show up in your life. You've kind of told me you've had anxiety. Lisa and I were actually met over a mastermind course that we took, and we were both hairstylists in our previous lives. You owned a salon in San Francisco for quite a long time. And was that part of like your journey at all, perhaps? Or where would you like to start?
We can start there because my salon was a huge part of my transformation, and it was unintentionally because if you had asked the version of me when I opened the salon, that was going to be my life forever. Like I was going to grow old in the salon, and the 26-year-old version of me took a huge risk and a huge leap because I was working in a salon in San Francisco at that time, and I knew that I always was wanting to be a business owner, and that was something I knew from a very young age as a child. And a lot of that had to do with my father was a business owner, and I watched his transition from being an employee to a business owner. And I said, I want to do that, and I want to do it better, right? And
Always.
right. and and so when I was working in this salon in San Francisco, I thought, okay, I need to start getting myself together to reach this goal. And the initial step was literally, back then Craigslist was the thing, and so I went on Craigslist and looked for rental spaces just to see what was out there, and literally just wanted to start to get my toes wet, see what I was looking at, what was I going to have to pay for rent, and
And I'm
and
sure rent
so
in San Francisco wasn't cheap.
no, it was not. And so I went to the first showing of a unit that I found on Craigslist, and I just fell in love with the building. It was a historic building in San Francisco, and I loved it. But the space that was available for rent when the owner showed it to me, it was too big and out of my price range. So I was like, okay, this is a good start for me to see what's out there. And kind of under my breath as we walked back downstairs, there was this other little space that was kind of tucked to the side. And under my breath I said, that would be my perfect space. And I didn't even realize I said it out loud. And he said, "Do you like that space?" And I said, "That would be my perfect space for the salon that I envision." And he said, "Well, that's our storage space." And he said, "But if you want it, we'll clear it out."
Oh my God, you just like manifested it right there. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And so I literally, to make a long story short, I literally went from having this vision in my head to, okay, I gotta like get this together quick because I the next day signed a lease
Wow.
and had barely any money in the bank. So took a chance to step out on faith, and all that to say, I had a month to get the salon together, and I
And was it
just
just you, or were you planning on having others?
it was two chairs, and it was going to
Okay.
just be me initially, and I knew that I had the clientele to just sustain, right? Not thrive,
Not thrive. Yes.
but sustain. And I said, as long as I could get it up and running in a month, I could sustain until I could thrive. And so I buckled down. I got a loan from a friend for a couple $1,000s to kind of do some, little things to make it into a salon, and got some discount equipment, and just, yeah, launched in and made it happen. And it was the beginning of a huge transformation for 10 years. I signed a 10-year lease
That day.
that day.
Wow, Lisa. That is no small feat.
Back then, I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah, that's like kind of the almost like dumb like reasoning for doing things, right? Like, but if we could even like take a piece of that and add that into our daily lives now, of like how can we just impulsively like, because there's also got to be a part of like your intuition that was like showing up like, I mean, you even saw as you were walking down the stairs, you were like, man, that was like a hell, like a dreaming hell no. But like, look at this cute little space down here that most people look at that as like trash or storage. And something within you said, yes, like this is it. And like, you even said, I don't even know that I said it, right? It felt like an internal situation, but like, some sort of power made that come out of your mouth into existence. And then there it came.
Yeah. And it's funny because within I think, if I rewind back correctly, around 6 months, 6 months to a year was when I started to do well. And I would literally have clients say, like, how did you take such a leap? And the 26, 27-year old version of me was like, what leap did I take? Right. And I didn't know any better. I just knew what I wanted and knew that I could take the steps. And so the version of me now, 20 years later, uses that frame of reference, because the version of me now starts to intellectualize things. Right? And I have to remember that 26-year-old version and go, remember, you took that step and you just did it.
The courage. Yeah.
Yeah, courage is something that I believe happens more effortlessly when you're young. And then when you get older, you have to do it more intentionally and with more wisdom.
Yes. Well, that's what somebody had even talked about the word wisdom of, in order to get wise, you have to be dumb first.
I
And
like that.
yeah, I did too. And when you think about it, like the dumbness, right, of our like immaturity and just not knowing, right, of that situation for yourself created 10 years for you to gain being wise, right, turning into wisdom, and how you live now in your life, and being able to look back and reflect at all of that, and what really helped you and served you, what didn't, and that's creating wisdom for you. But we had to become dumb first.
Yeah. I didn't know I could fail. Now I know I could fail.
Hmm. And so how was your time in that 10-year experience?
The experiences that I had over that 10 years, it's funny when I look back, and And ironically, right now I'm writing about that time in my life, and so the memories are flooding through, and it's really insightful, even though in the moments I was just living in the moments. And so the the relationships that came into my life during that time, the relationships with clients, the relationships with friends, the relationships with other professionals, because at that time I was also doing contract work. I was hired with an agency, so I would do hair and makeup for different events, and so all of the different relationships that came into my life taught me a lot during that time, all centered around the salon, because that was the place where I practically lived. And to be honest, most people don't know this, but at one point I did live in my salon, and that's something that none of my clients even knew at that time. But there was a room off to the side in my space, and there was a point where, in order to keep afloat, I made a choice to live there. And
Mm.
so a lot of my life lessons literally happened in that space, and the relationships that informed what I do now, whether they were intimate relationships or relationship with my clients, and that dynamic, you did hair as well. You develop this rapport with people where you take steps back and learn to listen, and learn to
Mm-hmm.
listen well. And a lot of times people were asking for feedback, and so I didn't realize at that time, but it was just 10 years of preparation, and
Yeah.
I thought it was the end game.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think that when what do you feel like becoming a really great listener is, what we really have to do, right? These people trust us. They came into our chair and, we're not hairstylists, we're therapists, right? And they, most of the clients that I had done for over 10 years, I knew their whole backstory, right? Knew their entire life, knew about their children, knew about their partners or their husbands or whatever. And I, you gain this trust, right? They sit in your chair and there is like an energetic confine that forms of trust, and they can trust whatever they tell you. And that happens by becoming a good listener. And I think that's why you and I are really great at facilitating the jobs that we do now. Lisa being a relationship coach, me being a hypnotherapist. And it really gives aspect to life when you really can like sit back and listen and like come into somebody else's world. And so, but like, why, while you were doing that, what was going on with you?
Yeah, one of the things that set what I was doing apart, that really tied into my own growth, was the fact that this salon was a boutique salon. And for many of the 9 years, or sorry, 10 years that I was in business, I was there by myself with the client. And so not only were clients sharing their stories with me, because of that intimate environment, I was being asked to share my story. And a lot of times I realized that I had grown up in a home where I didn't know how to communicate. And that was just because I grew up in a quiet home where we read each other's minds, because we had learned, uh, unintentionally really, we had learned how to read each other. And so when I became an adult, people couldn't read me, not like my
Mm.
family. And so I had to learn how to talk to people. And this was a big practice for me. So it started in the salon where I really honed in on the fact that I didn't know how to communicate my needs, my desires. But within the context of the salon, I knew when a person shared their need of what they wanted with their hair, I knew how to fulfill that need. And I used that as a teacher for me and how I could express my needs because as you know, it comes to this point where if somebody comes in and they want their hair a certain color or they want it cut a certain way, if they don't communicate it well to you or you don't receive it well, things can go awry.
Oh, yes, very much so.
Yeah. And so I really honed in on that dynamic of making sure I understood my clients for exactly what they wanted and communicated that to them. And so what was happening at the same time is that I was dating and I was finding in my dating life that I wasn't transferring these skills well.
Mm.
Right? And I was wondering, maybe this is just isn't meant for me. Maybe I'm just supposed to focus on my career and I don't need a man because by this point I think within the first 5 years I was making six figures. So in my mind I was like, I'm good, right? Taking care of my own needs financially, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
have a friend here and there and my needs are met. Right? And what I was finding is there was this dissonance between what I was saying that I wanted and what I actually wanted. And even though I didn't know that, that was a time of practice because I would have these quote unquote relationships that wouldn't go anywhere. And I couldn't figure out why I couldn't deeply connect to another human. And the lessons I learned along the way
So
of what I was.
what was that doing to you emotionally and physically, that there's this thing that you have this amazing way of communicating with people in your salon and to your clients, but when it would transfer outside of that, there was a disconnect, right? And what was what were you experiencing physically or emotionally in that time?
It's interesting. At that time, I didn't connect the two because I didn't have the awareness in my mind and body, work and home, work and personal was separate.
Right.
Right there,
Which it is
I
for
was,
most people.
yeah, I was really good at compartmentalizing. And so back then I didn't connect. But when I look back, oh yeah, there were many signs of what was going wrong and where the disconnect was. And the times where I would go home and just veg out or watch TV or not really work on my own personal development. I channeled it into other things. And looking back, realizing that they were just distractions. And it came a point for me where one of these guys that I was dating, that I tried to act like, oh, we're just hanging out, when he didn't choose me, right? I felt heartbroken. And and that was the first time where I really started to understand that I could deeply feel. And prior to that, I had a hard shell around me. I didn't feel a thing.
Mm. And where do you feel like that hard shell came from?
Oh, looking back, it's obvious. My parents divorced when I was 3, and my mom moved states away. I grew up with my dad, and eventually he remarried and had a great childhood. And but when your parents divorce when you're 3, even when you're not completely aware of what that does mentally, it does something. And what I know to be true is that that moment of my mom leaving, I made a decision at that young age that I was going to hold my heart safe.
Mm.
And if I didn't let it go to that place, then I wouldn't have heartbreak. And that developed over years of being a child and learning how to protect myself. And I'm very grateful for that, because now as I help my clients, I can see it, right? I can see it because that was me.
Yeah. And at what point do you feel like you connected that to the heartbreak, being so closed off, and knowing that that closed offness came from that little girl who needed to keep herself safe?
To be honest, it was actually well into my marriage. I was working with a coach at the time, and she wasn't even a relationship coach. Actually, we were working on just personal growth things and some business things. And one day she said something to me. She said, "Oh," and we've known each other for a very long time. She actually met me shortly after I opened the salon. And one of the things she said to me, she said, "It's very obvious to me." She said, "You're avoidant." And I was like, "What? I'm not avoidant. What are you talking about?" And she's like, "Oh no, you're classic avoidant." And I was resistant to that concept because I didn't completely know what that meant. And around that time, I don't remember the time frame, but I went back to school to get my master's degree, and started to see all of the things start to come together in my learning. And I thought, oh yeah, this makes sense. Yeah, I was definitely avoidant, right? And that helped me to be able to rewind and look back at my past behaviors, but also look at my current behavior and how that impacts my current behavior.
Excuse me. Okay, keep going.
Because ultimately that's my default, right? And so even with all the work that I've done and the growth that I've had, there's still that default. And the only difference is now I'm very much aware of it, and I can observe it, right? And I don't have to always be in it and actively avoiding. So when those moments happen where that default would have been to run or to deflect or to detach, I can go, "Oh, yeah, that's that moment where I literally would run away." And that allows me to just feel it, know what that feeling is, and go, "It'll pass."
Right. And I think that speaking into your ability now to really be able to witness that and to know it by its name and call it what it is when it's showing up for you, but how often people that are really suffering or struggling and having this fleeing mentality, right? I mean, it's the survival mechanisms, living in survival, right? I mean, it is truly the zebra trying to run away from the gazelle, the cheetah. And most people feel as if that's normal reaction.
Yeah.
And that they don't understand that that is actually also their nervous system saying, get the fuck out. And because that's the overarching program that's now taken place, because that's what we've taught our body to do over and over and over. And so most of the time it does it without us even thinking, whether it's in a hard conflict, whether it's in relationship, whether it's in work, whatever it's showing up as. And when do you feel like you started to, I know you said you had met with the coach, but like, what was coming up for you that was witnessing maybe like a situation where it's like, oh, there it is, I'm doing it?
Let me think of an example of a time. I would say there's a direct moment that I can reference, that was happening early in my relationship, and that for me really looks at growing up. I didn't experience conflict in my family, in my immediate family, and what that looked like is we never argued, we never disagreed, theoretically, right? We never voiced our disagreement. And so I never experienced conflict outside of observing it in other places, right? So what that did is it told me that conflict was bad, disagreement was bad. If you don't think the same way, it's bad. So you should run, right?
Mm.
So if early on in my relationship, I experienced any dissonance, right, where we weren't seeing eye to eye or I didn't understand, I saw that as that meant I should run. And I've been very blessed with a husband who understood innately my avoidance, even though he didn't know that it was called something, right? He knew that he was with someone who had her tennis shoes ready.
Mm.
And he would gently take my hand, metaphorically speaking, and keep me with it until it passed. Whereas the old version of me would be like, I'm out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that was a big lesson for me, because up until my relationship with my husband, the longest commitment I had ever had was my salon. And the reason that that salon had a commitment for me is because I had signed a 10-year lease. And I did that on purpose, right? Even though it wasn't completely conscious, signing a 10-year lease meant that I couldn't put on my tennis shoes and run. And my husband taught me that I was signing a lease, right, with him.
Mm.
And that lease means, yeah, sometimes you might struggle to get the rent together for the month, but you don't get to run, right? And so that just really taught me some massive increasing of my capacity. I learned that my capacity was small.
Mm. And that's so wild to even just witness as you speak it, to think about how subconsciously you knew you had to sign that 10-year lease, right? Consciously, you maybe weren't aware that, oh, if this is like something that's only going to be a year or 2 or 6 months, even, like, I could easily have a way out. And subconsciously, it really served you to sign that 10-year lease because there was something within your body that you knew, even if you didn't know it at the time, as you said. And wow, that's just really, and that to me is also part of believing and trusting that there is a co-creation of source, of spirit supporting you and your back in that moment. And the journey that you had to go through, there was no stepping out of.
Yeah.
And so I like to bring light to this because I think for me, you know, when I had a lot of anxiety and I didn't necessarily run, I actually found comfort in my places or being around those people. But at the time, I had so many physical symptoms that were coming up, but I didn't know what to do with them. I thought they were actual, like, things happening in my body, like I was dying or having a heart attack or things like that. And so I really like to bring awareness for everyone, especially the people listening, to being able to start to recognize that your body actually gives you signs of what's happening. And so in these fleeing moments where you're being avoidant, maybe you didn't know it at the time, but could you say, is there anything now that maybe shows up in your body physically that is kind of giving you this warning signal that this is about to happen?
Yeah, 100%. From my teenage years, I had uterine fibroids. And if people don't know anything about uterine fibroids, they're masses that grow inside the uterus. And sometimes they grow outside of it, sometimes they grow inside the walls. And they're painful. And there's stats that show that a lot of women who have uterine fibroids tend to have suppressed emotions. And for me, yeah, that was very much the case. I learned from an early age to suppress my voice, right? To suppress my emotions. And so what I learned to do is, instead of expressing them, if I felt them, I ran. And so the moments where the pain was the most intense was usually in those moments of fight or flight. And even though I didn't make the connections at those moments, as I got older, it started to build, and the suppression became more because there was more at stake. You know, when you're in your 20s, everything's possible. Nothing's at stake, right?
Right.
You get into your 30s, and that's when I started to experience anxiety, is because I started to feel, right? And the reason I be prior to that, I couldn't even relate when people would even mention anxiety. I was like, I don't know what that is. I don't experience that. But
Mm-hmm.
it was simply because I was so shut off. I had numbed myself, right? So then as I started to feel, and that all happened after a breakup, is that shell cracked and the emotions started coming through, and I didn't know what to do with them.
I bet. And so what
Yeah.
did that anxiety show up for you in that time?
it it showed up in more pain, but it also showed up in a sense of hopelessness and a doom and gloom. And that was never my way of being. I never, prior to that, I never felt a sense of doom and gloom. And it was scary for me. And so that was a point where I actually was coming up on the end of my 10-year lease of the salon. And I thought I would wake up and feel this sense of I'm not doing my purpose, right? And up until that point, I thought doing hair was my purpose, right? I was going to do people's hair for the rest of my life.
And
And
you
so
woke up
this,
feeling this is not my purpose.
yeah, yeah. And so I would initially, when I felt that, I thought, oh, I'm just PMSing. Fibroids are flaring up. Go to work, put your heating pad on, take some ibuprofen, you'll be good.
Yeah.
And
And
so,
I'm going to stop you for a second just because I feel like that what you just said right there is happening to women everywhere and men everywhere. Maybe not uterine fibroids, but that thinking that this is okay, this is just another day, this is part of my life. This is happening everywhere in the world. Thinking that it's okay to live your life like this. And that doctors say it's normal, that, oh, the anxiety you're experiencing is just a normal like emotion. And yes, they are emotions that we have. They are not emotions that we should experience on a daily basis to the extreme that we do. We should not have to take a pill because somebody wants to put a Band-Aid on it and then we start leaking from another place in our body. And this is why this podcast is so important to me, to give voice to what you just said and how it's just another day. And that if you're listening to this, it doesn't have to be just another day. And to use Lisa's story as inspiration. So keep going as we get into that inspiration.
yeah, so I just thought it was another day. And I thought, okay, it'll be fine. It's just a fleeting moment. And that fleeting moment kept happening. And I remember, I'm going to say probably about a week after that first moment, I thought, I can't live this way. There's no way that I'm going to continue to wake up and go through the motions and come home and feel the same way for the rest of my life. Something's got to change. And I made a radical change in my life. And I was fortunate around this time. I think I still had about a year left on my lease for the salon. And I thought, I can't do this, but I have a year left on this lease. And so I ended up going to Florida because at that time, being in San Francisco, all of my family's in Florida. And I decided to come to Florida and visit for a little bit and just get my bearings. And so I think I took a week off, flew home, and talked to my dad and told him a little bit. I didn't tell him the full story, but just said that I was ready for a change. And it came to this moment where I started to think about my mom, my biological mom, who I did not grow up with. She left when I was 3. And my dad said, I think it's time for you to spend some time with her. And as I reflected during that time in Florida, I decided that I would leave San Francisco, see about renting a chair to someone in the salon, and stay in Houston, which is where my mom lived. And it it just started as I took action, things fell into play. I put an ad on Craigslist that I was looking for someone to rent out the salon space to. And I had this idea that I'll come back into town every 4 to 6 weeks and see some clients, make some money. And I put an ad literally the next day. A girl messaged me and she came, sat in the salon with me after at the end of the day, and I handed her the keys, signed an agreement, and within a couple days left to go to Houston. And people will think, you just met this girl and handed over keys. I knew it was right. And I knew that I had to do something different. And so I would, for 2 years actually, I would go back and forth from Houston to San Francisco. I spent the majority of my time in Houston. I would fly to San Francisco once a month, work 12-hour days for about 4 days out of the week, make enough money to live for the month, and go back to Houston. And
Wow.
that was a very vulnerable time in my life, because I remember getting to Houston when I decided to move there. And within a couple of days, I woke up one day and I went, oh, I was attached to an identity as a hairstylist. That was my identity.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, I no longer had that identity. And that was a massive shift for me, because I'd been doing hair for 20 years at that point. And all of a sudden, to really connect the dots that I had put all of my life's energy into my identity as a hairstylist, no wonder I wasn't deeply connecting. And
Mm-hmm.
so putting that on the shelf and dedicating time to connecting with my mom, going full circle back to the source, and healing a lot of what had gone on in my mind during all of those years subconsciously. And it wasn't easy. It was not easy. But it was during that time that I met my husband.
Mm. Well, and there's something to say too about when we remove the thing that is tethering us to that identity. And not that it was wrong, or not that it was even necessarily baggage for you, because it was a huge part of your journey. It was a huge part of your learning and who you are now. It was required. It had to happen. But in order for us to continue to evolve, you know, the idea with like the American dream is that we graduate high school, we go to college, we get a job, we get married, we have the house, we do all these things. And like when we do that, like, okay, well, if you're getting a job, let's just say at like 25, and you get married, like, then what? Right? There's this like after of like, well, what do I do now? Kind of thing, right? Nobody really talks about that. Nobody really talks about reinventing themselves or evolving themselves. And I think it's beautiful to witness people that have become a student of life and that continue to realize that one of the first people that really inspired me, it was a cousin of mine who he was a teacher, and then he became a he had a tax practice, and then now he's an investment. He has an investment business, and he just kept reinventing himself over and over and over. And there's a part of him that I kept saying, like, oh, it's actually okay to decide I don't want to do this anymore. And that's not really talked about for most people. And what you were deciding in that moment is that, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. And I want to become something different. In order to do that, I have to leave all of this behind. And for a lot of people, that's really fucking scary. And, you know, I similarly did hair for 17 years and decided this isn't for me anymore. And I would have never thought in my fucking lifetime that I would have said that. Probably as you did as well. But to become the person that you were, and why, like you say, as you decided in that moment and you found the girl the next day, you know, things started lining up exactly. When we truly surrender and let go of that thing that hasn't allowing the bigger picture of life to actually show up for us, it does. And the minute that you surrendered that, everything started showing up, and you met your husband.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of things that people are waiting to have that ideal job or waiting to meet the ideal man or woman or whatever it is. And they don't realize that they're in the way themselves, because maybe the version of themselves that's present can't be present with that other thing to come into their life.
Yeah. I literally had to strip myself down. And, you know, during the time when I met my husband, I was barely making any money. And I was used to making six figures. And I had literally cut my income down to, I mean, it was, I think, a quarter of what I was used to making. And it was scary. But it was necessary so that the version of me that said, I don't need a man, and had a hard time saying I need help, or I could use some help, by being in that position, it allowed me the space to do that. And my husband recognized that in me as we got to know each other. And it was one of the things that he really has helped me to work through and continue to work through, because now, even though I'm making a good living again now, it's still manifests for me when a simple thing like bringing groceries in, and he says, hold on, I can open the door for you. You don't have to do all this by yourself, right? Or let me carry something for you. You don't have to carry all of the bags that you're loaded down with. You just can ask for help. And it's a continuous journey for me to be able to surrender to that concept. And so initially I had to strip way down to the point where I was forced to know, because how my husband and I met was because emotionally he helped me, right? When we met at a retreat, and during that retreat my fibroids flared up, and I was not having a good time. I was in pain, and he was the photographer for the retreat, and he could see that I was not doing well. And he was the person that encouraged me. And so it was in those vulnerable moments that I always saw as weakness. He showed me how to connect. And those lessons that I had along the way really shifted my perspective, especially around vulnerability. And that's something that I focus a lot on with clients, because most of the clients that are drawn to me are that version of me, right?
Yeah,
And see vulnerability as weakness. And it's actually vulnerability that allows you, or can allow you, to deeply connect with another human.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that too, like even as you're speaking about how the fibroids showed up, I would guess, do you ever still find yourself in situations where maybe they flare up? Or do you feel like that's surpassed for the most part?
Well, I, in 2016, um, made a decision that I knew I wasn't having kids, and I said, you know what? I can get rid of this. So I had a hysterectomy in
Okay.
2016. So now it doesn't manifest as fibroids. It manifests as digestion issues, right? So the version of me that had the hysterectomy in 2016 was like, all right, done with it,
Mm-hmm.
done, right? And yeah,
Nope,
I
not so much.
right. Done in the sense of I no longer have fibroids, right?
Sure.
And one of the best decisions of my life. I'm I and people have different opinions about having hysterectomy, but for me, one of the best choices of my life.
Yeah.
And so now I get to recognize the vulnerability in a different way. So I know, and granted, it's not always 100%, but when my stomach bothers me, there's usually something I'm suppressing. Not
Mm,
always, but it can be a cue for me.
yeah, and I love that. And just that not that's giving you power though also, right? And how many of the things that show up physically in our body and manifest into our body, we don't, and doctors, I'm not a doctor, I'm by no means giving medical advice, but there's that aspect to me that's missing within the medical community of, if our doctors could actually get to know us better, they might be able to pinpoint things like this of emotional distress manifesting in our body. And for me, similarly, I had hypothyroidism. And so I know when my thyroid is flaring up, I'm going back to the old me, right? The, the problems with my thyroid are associated with the old version of myself. And so when that does show up for me now, I've returned back to my old self. And that is a cue, like you said, of like, okay, what am I doing here? And using it as feedback and tools to really allow yourself to re-regulate your nervous system, your emotions, and where you are, and bring that to the surface. And that is something I really love to teach in my programs and working one-on-one with me. And how powerful now you have become by having that awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been pretty impactful, because one of the things, and you reminded me that over, I think it started, yeah, 2019. I started to have symptoms of autoimmunity, and up until that point, didn't really understand autoimmunity. Would hear of different stories and so on, and I started having what I thought was initially just a virus, and every couple of months the symptoms would come back. I'd feel really tired, just just really weak, and I have a regular fitness routine, and there was a point where I didn't have the strength or the energy to keep up with that. And that was alarming for me, because I hadn't experienced that in the entire time that I since I started my fitness journey, and that was in 2009. And so in 2019, as I started to have those symptoms, I thought I need to go to the doctor and figure out what's going on. And went and, as you probably know, got all the blood work done. Okay, I'm going to get the answer to whatever this is and figure it out. And test would come back, nothing's wrong. You're good. And I'd be like, I'm not good. There's something going on here. Right. And it got to the point where I just gave up because I wasn't getting answers. I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it wasn't until I started seeing, at the recommendation of a friend, um, a holistic doctor that was, I'm trying to think of what the term was, but either way, a very holistic approach, and really saw me, as you said, saw me as a human, and really cared about my personal journey, and what we could look at, not just based on blood work. And so it helped me so much. And around that time as well, I was doing a program, a manifestation program, and got into Joe Dispenza's work, which I know you're into as well. And yeah, and really stopped the sporadic meditation practice and really made it a practice. And it literally shifted the combination of the holistic approach to my health and a solid meditation practice, and really going deep into the energetics. I haven't had symptoms in, it's been almost a year. And
Amazing.
yeah, so it's very, very exciting. There's still that piece that goes, okay, is it gonna surface again, right? Uh, but I know that I have the
And it could,
tools.
depending on your emotional state too, right?
Exactly, exactly. But now I know
Yeah.
the tools to use to navigate that, and so I don't stress about, oh my goodness, am I going to be down for the count? Because one of the things for me that was a stressor was cold weather. Cold weather tends to be the time when I have the hardest time. And so as we go into winter, I'm very mindful of taking care of myself, and knowing and remembering the tools that I've learned.
Mm, I love this. And you are such an inspiration, Lisa, and to continue to be the advocate for yourself, your health, and also for the health of the people that you are working with through your own journey. And that journey inspires people to be courageous, to move beyond what we think is normal or comfortable, and to be willing to potentially lose it all to become the person that we are put here on this earth to be. And so I hope that if you are listening, this story leaves you with a little glimpse into what's possible if you allow yourself. And should you ever need a hand to be held along the way, Lisa and I are both here to facilitate in different ways. If you ever need, I will put all of her information in the show notes if you would like to contact her. And I'm just so grateful to know you as a human. And if, based on your story, Lisa, for someone that's listening, the one person that maybe now believes in themselves that they can do more, what would you say to them right now?
I would say that one of the things that has been the most helpful for me is in those moments where you have an opportunity to shift, remember those childlike moments where you couldn't fail, right? And really understand that we must take a risk. And it doesn't mean to do and take risks recklessly, but it does mean that we must get uncomfortable, because when you get into that discomfort, that's where you stretch your capacity. And when you stretch your capacity, you grow.
Yes, stretch. Well, you guys have heard it. The inspiration of Lisa Holt, charting her own way and mapping her destiny through stretching herself. So thank you, Lisa, and see you guys next time.